Welcome everyone to the Bend Utilities Public Advisory Group meeting. This is March 1st. Excited to have everybody back here with us. We have a good meeting in store for us today. So our game plan is to spend some time getting your input on applying water conservation and stormwater codes and standards in design and development for landscape areas. So our agenda included a preview of a couple of our discussion questions that we have planned to go through today, and also a chapter of standards language, which you didn't have to read, but was there just in case you wanted to have that as a reference for today's conversation.
We should have prizes for people that will read the code language.
You could quote it from memory. So that's going to be the bulk of our conversation today, but we are going to, before we close out, we want to give a quick update on the stormwater program as well. So we'll get into it. And we do have a little warm up here. So Dan, if you want to kind of talk through, we've got a couple slides with some examples of a new brand look and want to get your guys' reactions. Do you have anything you want to say to start us off, Dan?
Yeah, sure. Well, first of all, good morning, everybody. Thanks for joining us again. Just wanted to follow up. This is something we're currently working on as part of our heightened communication efforts. So we're working on some kind of graphics templates for our program, for our efforts, specifically the code enforcement and rebate sides of things. And so we're just looking for some consistency in branding and recognition. So really, this is, I think, these images come from kind of the second version or second draft version that they sent to us. So things have changed a little bit, but just slight things on some of the graphics. We got rid of these little octopus or octopi tentacles off of some of these icons and what have you. But so still in refinement, but just wanted to kind of get initial reactions or thoughts or ideas from folks. I think we've got social media templates here. So these would be used mostly in our social media posts. I think the next slide, Aubrey, we had some of the kind of print or flyer templates that we might use for information. Again, just really assigning one color. This navy or this bluish color is they call lake, which would be assigning to code enforcement documents or things relating code enforcement, and then kind of that green juniper color there would be our rebate related materials. We thought, blue is kind of a calming color, so just that might calm people down when we're talking about fines and regulatory items. And then Melissa, one of our staffers, made the point, it's like, oh, green like money for rebates. So we thought it might be a good fit, but yeah, just open for discussion. Any initial thoughts or reactions to that?
I'll just add to that, Dan, that so to me, these are like picture frames, right? So it's what we insert materials into, and we want to have something that's recognizable as the city and as utilities or the water stuff at the city, and hopefully be able to roll out this kind of look, so also potentially on the stormwater side as well. Maybe we pick another version of the blue-green color scheme, but that's the stormwater program colors as well. So really want to be thoughtful about picking things that make you think Bend and make you think all water stuff at Bend.
That's right. Yeah. So this is part of a larger effort through the city to kind of get consistency, a branded look. So we were lucky enough to get these two colors kind of assigned to our program, and a logo specific to our program. So again, creating recognition as, a city department, but also specifically water conservation, and then hopefully going down the same route with stormwater. So we're kind of the guinea pigs on this, but happy to do so. But I think we can move on unless anybody has some comments or questions. We can get into the
well, I was hoping people would just give a gut reaction. Like, what do you think about like the squiggly lines? What do you think about the colors? What do you think about maybe even go back one slide, Aubrey, that there's those little circular logos, like the one with the shower head, there's the hand with the water drop, there's the sprinkler, So kind of that type of approach. You can also see, oh, Dan, you have the one with the one on the far right has kind of like the mountains with the wavy look too.
Yeah, so that's their latest version of our watermark. So you'll notice on some of the other printed documents, they've kind of got that's the same version of these three kind of squiggly water lines that are pretty generic and odd looking. So we wanted something almost, more relative to Bend. And so we had them kind of customize a little watermark there. So that's part of the newer revisions that we just got done with. So yeah, I added that in there this morning. There was a debate on whether that first one was Broken Top, South Middle Sister, and Mount Jefferson, but be curious to see what you guys think.
Any thumbs up or thumbs down? Thoughts from the team?
I'll jump in that. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, awesome. The first picture on the left kind of makes me laugh because that doesn't look like Bend. That jumps
yeah.
out.
Good eye, Molly. Yeah, no, so these are just framework templates. So the photos are going to be customized by us, but they just threw photos in there to represent, where the photo versus the text blocks and all that goes. So, the headers, the text box, the icons will all be editable and be able to move around, but this is the general format. And then the photos are going to be specific to kind of whatever our message is or whatever our content would be.
Yeah, just something, kind of applying water to a landscape around here. I would hope that would be an image of, like your ideal, water conservation style landscape around here. So kind of an opportunity of what we'd like to see more of, I suppose.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, that's the idea, is hopefully, we've got a lot of national campaigns, EPA water sense campaigns at Fix a Leak Week, sprinkler spruce ups that we could use these for, but as well as our own events or our own content or material. Just something really versatile that maintains that consistent look, but can be used throughout any communications. But yeah, definitely we could use that for some example landscapes to inspire folks. And yeah, cool.
And you did say that you're not going to have the 3 water lines coming out of the circles, that already was.
No, that was that was just a funny kind of lost in translation, trying to do graphic edits through email, and that came back as one of the interpretations, but no. So all the icons themselves will be, actually I could kind of share. Let me see if I've got it up on my computer. I could share some renditions of what Aubrey, can I share real quick?
Yeah.
Cool. So here's some of the latest renditions. So this is what the icons would look like.
Let's see, Dan, did you maybe click once
No,
more?
there we go.
There we go.
There we go. It had my screen outlined like Teams does, and so I thought I was sharing, but I wasn't. Yeah, so they came up with a few icons for us to use, a few variations. This was our latest round that we submitted edits to, so a few of these will change. But yeah, so
What is that one on the second line, Dan? Is that supposed to be the 3 smokestacks?
yeah, so this was like old mill smokestacks. So again, it was their attempt at trying to find something, local that said Bend, right? So looking for those iconic kind of horizon lines or photos. So
I don't know. It looks like birthday candles to me.
well, there you go. We could we could send you a birthday postcard, Lori. But yeah, so that's the general feel of them, just repeating those same colors and kind of water related graphics. Is what we're aiming for.
In general, I really like your branding, and I think I would vote for like the simpler the better, especially with the icons. One thing is that some of those little watermark ones look very similar to the BPRD logo. And so just if you're wanting to be very specific, with the city branding, just to keep in mind, because otherwise people might kind of mix them up, or, it's different than ours for sure, but it's enough that at a first glance, people might look at it and think that it's BPRD too.
Oh, okay.
And I know we already get mixed up enough, so.
Yeah, no, that's a good comment. We, it's funny, we looked at like Upper Deschutes, the River Conservancy, and everybody had kind of like a different version of that. And so, but no, good point. And we will look at that. If it's too similar, we're still able to change it. But yeah, everybody wants to use the mountains and the river.
It's not just Bend either, I would say. That's across the board. Awesome.
Okay.
All right. So we'll get back into it here.
Well, that was good feedback. Thank you.
Thank you,
everybody.
guys. Great. So just a preview or a reminder for the water conservation input today. So we're going to talk through, share a little bit of information, and then we want to circle back and get your guys' input on standards that you feel should apply to private property, whether that code language is clear enough, or if there's something that you feel is missing that would help provide that clarity. And then what do you think about the two proposed approaches that we're going to talk through or preview a little bit today, and tools to help communicate with individuals about those two approaches. So we're going to dive into it and then come back to these questions. Dan?
Cool. Thanks, Aubrey. So as we start diving into the landscape realm, I just wanted to kind of highlight some more information on why we're doing this. What the implications are, with water use in our landscapes. So that we'll just start with the graph there. So that's just, our seasonal bell curve, right? But you can see the difference in scale of how, our outdoor water use is growing versus the indoor kind of baseline of that 5 to 6 million gallons a day, jumping up to the 26, so obviously that's over a pretty long time period or temporal scale. Lots of things happened between those that time, right? We've had a recession, we've had some growth and exoduses, but in general, this really just highlights that, despite some maybe advances in water using devices or homes, we're not seeing the same kind of savings in the landscape. And so that's really all I'm trying to highlight here, right? So we've got, energy policy that was kind of enacted that set our max flows for indoor devices. Those are currently in code, right? So our 1.6 toilets, I think, is the current standard. Of course, there's more efficient devices, but that's not the current code as we're speaking today. But even reviewing our plumbing code, all of it is up to date indoors. We still have a disparity outdoors. And so because so much of our water is used, 60% of our total production is used outdoors, there really is some opportunity there and some need for us to address the outdoor code. Next slide, please, Aubrey. So just a few stats for here in Bend. So this is our typical single family residential landscape size distribution. So this is the size of the landscape within the building lot. So we get this data, we use this data, when we recruit single family residential folks into our sprinkler inspection program, because we're creating water budgets in order to identify which customers we need to talk to. So to sum that up, about 50% of our single family residential lots are in the 4,000 to about almost 7,000 square foot range. That's kind of our average size lot here in Bend. just to reference, again, the need for code. If we look at the annual water requirements for cool season turf or Kentucky bluegrasses, our ryegrasses here in Bend, the plant water need for the whole year, the growing season, is 15 gallons per square foot. So that blue graph on the right, that means we need to apply just the plant's water need 15 gallons per square foot of turf annually over the growing season for that to be a healthy stand of turf grass. If we add irrigation inefficiencies, or what we test when we do these inspections to that, so how much extra water we need to apply based off the efficiency of our irrigation systems, that number goes up to about 25 gallons per square foot. If you look at the folks that we're working with in the program, that average top consumer is applying about 50 gallons per square foot. So double what they need to, even without making on top of the inefficiency of the irrigation system. So if we, this is basically showing there's a lot of low-hanging fruit out there that we can correct by looking and maintaining our irrigation systems differently. Next slide, please, Aubrey. And so some of the things we'll touch on is, yes, we want to encourage more climate appropriate plants in our landscape. That's part of what we'll talk about. But the other part is really, the irrigation system and the management, right? We can still overwater natives. So there's an education component to this as well that we'll talk about. But we're gonna start with kind of like outside the building envelope and that private lot in the street strip. Some people call them health strips or pollutant pathways. There's lots of names for them, but they're just these really difficult areas, in the easement that are landscaped. It's a utility easement, but it's maintained usually by the homeowner or the customer. And we do have code in our engineering standards and specs that I want to run through real briefly. So this is existing language. There's our minimum design standards for landscapes and irrigation in our right-of-ways. It applies to all right-of-ways, but is currently only being enforced in capital projects.
Can you explain what that means, Dan? So what's a
Sure.
capital project versus other projects?
Sure. So it is not being reviewed to the extent that we'd like or enforced for your private development, commercial buildings, master plan developments, your residential homes. It is being applied in our capital projects, which are like our city-owned right-of-ways. So Newport, Empire Corridor, 14th Street, any of these new street projects that you see happening, we are following this code.
So maybe I can add to that. So yeah, so typically a capital project is one that the city is designing and building. So these are all right of way, but what happens is a lot of new development actually builds new streets for us, right? They are required to build streets, water lines, stormwater systems, all that then get handed over to public ownership because they're located in the right of way. So the capital projects where we're designing it, we're building it, we're doing a good job of. The ones where the developer is designing and building it, and then we're receiving it, we could probably improve how we're utilizing our existing standards that actually tell them to do things a certain way. So this is kind of new stuff for a lot of folks at the city, is figuring out how to implement code around landscapes. So I just wanted to make sure folks kind of understand but we're still only talking about the right of way. We're talking about that area that encompasses the street, the sidewalk, and the landscape strip. We're not talking about the private property between that at kind of the back of sidewalk and the building.
Right. And these are real problematic areas for us. Aside from aggregate water use, You know, these have implications. I mean, these are direct conduits to stormwater issues with dry flows and nutrient transport. I mean, you can drive down the street in the summer and you can see, you know, the watermark and the pellets of fertilizer on the other side of the watermark. And so there are a lot of other side effects to inefficiencies in this area. So yeah, let's see. So right now, this is supplemental to our private development code or our building code, which is chapter 3, which we'll talk in a later meeting. But as far as I know, right now, these are any inspection or review of these is tied to the building permit. And the only thing that's being reviewed, so street tree selection and street tree approval is part of this language. And right now, the tree requirements are the only thing being reviewed in the right-of-way in a planning or plan review site plan process. So like a master plan development, they are looking at street tree requirements, but nothing else. And largely because, like Lori mentioned, you know, they're figuring out, well, who needs to review this, which we've identified as ourselves. I mean, we do the review for those capital projects, but they don't have like a dedicated landscape architect or certified irrigation person in planning that would know what they're looking at. So capital projects, city design projects, they go to our department. We do have that experience and capability to review those. So we're going to suggest that these are treated the same. That is a suggestion we're going to bring back to our planning folks. These bulleted items, for those of you that did not read through the whole chapter 12, these are some specific things that are addressed in that language. It goes from landscape plan, design or plan submittal requirements to design requirements to planting and approved plants to irrigation and irrigation design. Next slide, Aubrey. And again, these are just the impacts, right? So we talked a little bit about the management, you know, which is, again, the plants we manage to our interpretation of what we want to see and to our aesthetics, right? If we see dry spots in the lawn, we don't try to necessarily figure out, you know, what the issue is. We just want that spot gone. So 9 times out of 10, that irrigation runtime just gets turned up. It's not really solving the problem, but it is, you know, resulting in a lot more water use. So just some quick math, you know, there were a lot of research papers done about, you know, 6 to 7% of the water applied to the right-of-way is lost through overspray and runoff in systems. That number gets increased even more, all the way up to 50% with irrigation efficiencies and, you know, evaporation, other environmental factors that are happening depending on the time of day that they water. If you extrapolate that out through a neighborhood, it's a substantial amount of water, you know, up to that 12,000 gallons in this example of 15 homes that's going down the storm drain, right? So that's washing debris. That's, you know, costing more maintenance for our Vector trucks to go out and clean out these dry wells, as well as impacting water quality with these dry flows. And it's not just our large users, you know, so that average square foot landscape, 4,080 feet, you know, this is happening across the board through our residential areas and our development areas. And the reality is these are probably, and Molly can probably attest to this, these are like the hardest areas to irrigate. You know, you can have correct spacing, you can monitor pressure, and it's just a tough way to do it. There are ways to make it better and more efficient. We just need to get the industry educated and maybe rethink what we're putting in here as far as irrigation and landscape, so that everybody can do it seamlessly, and not everyone needs to become an irrigation expert, right? Okay, so next slide, please, Aubrey.
All right, so this is just a kind of a quick reminder on what we wanted to talk through with the group. We're actually going to stop sharing here. We wanted to invite you guys into the mural space and kind of take a look at some of the language in particular and get your input. So I'm going to share my screen real quick, and then I will give you guys the link so we can dive in. So that should be showing the mural space right now. So once I give you the link, you can just click through and see it on your own screen. And as a reminder, there's this little sandwichy fellow button that shows up an outline, and you can jump straight to the March part of this digital whiteboard space. And then we're going to walk through kind of question 1, question 2, question 1B, and question 1C. And each of these has a set of standards. And what we want to do is just take a closer look at first the design language, then the planting language, and then the irrigation language. And you'll see there's some excerpts right here. And we just want you to grab, if you think it should be applied in the right of way and in private development, just grab an icon of your choice. You can collect one from over here on the left of the board and just drag it over if you think, yeah, let's apply that. Or you can click the llama and choose your icon of choice, like, you know, when you're doing a game of Monopoly back in your childhood, or just grab a dot, whatever your pleasure. So I'm going to stop my screen share so I don't confuse anybody here, and drop the link into the chat.
And just a couple items of clarification for those that don't know, hydrozoning in landscape design, that's just planting like water need plant material together in aspect in the yard or by water need. So our irrigation zones should be separated and watering those areas separately based off of plant water need aspect and where they are in the yard. So that's what hydrozoning is referred to. It's basically a way of being able to manage our water within the landscape more efficiently and apply the right amounts of water to the different plant materials effectively. The other part of this is our intent is that all of this will be applied to right away once we start integrating this into the inspection process. Vote for the things that you would also like to see go into the private lot as well. If there's any language in here that we want to incorporate into that private lot as well, please mark those too.
So there's the submit a landscape irrigation plan, comply with stormwater source control principles, the hydrozoning by plant water needs, slopes, and then also down at the bottom there, the street tree preservation.
So I think, yeah, what we've talked about is that, so we have some, we think pretty good standards for the right of way. We need to learn how to effectively apply them. So that one thing is writing the standards, the other is figuring out how to make sure they're being properly applied. And now it's like, but hey, there's the whole rest of the landscape. What should we do for that too, right?
I'll just give it another minute, and then maybe we can chat about these design standards if somebody wants to share after having had a chance to take a look at those, and then we can go open up the planting standards for input.
And maybe be thinking about, you know, maybe individual small lots versus bigger commercial projects or large subdivisions. We should talk about, yeah.
Sorry, yeah, I was thinking about that in terms of thresholds or something along those lines, especially for the plan. I was wondering how much work or cost is a landscape irrigation plan? Is that something you can do simply on your own, or do you need to hire someone for that?
So we'll get to this too, and we're going to have two kind of routes for people to take on the private development side, simplified route and a more extensive route. You know, it might be a little bit additional work up front, but on the individual lot, like the building permit, let's say development, they are going to have the option to just follow a checklist of items and not have to necessarily submit a complete irrigation plan for the one-off or two-off home or building. On the larger master plan scale, we are going to ask for the full detail irrigation plan. As long as they have someone that can provide the calculations, you know, and most LAs or have someone or are able to do that themselves. We do. Funny part is, on some developments, we do see this come in anyway, even though it's not being asked for. And this will be a more conversation on that private side meeting we have. So we are seeing certain developers and landscapers submitting these regardless. It's just a matter of making sure it's required and meets our standard.
And just so it's, sorry if I keep asking, but checking that box then here would just say that you would require this because it's not currently required, including just that short checklist for small properties.
Correct. Yes.
So maybe let's take a quick look here, because I think most people have had a little bit of time to think on this. So it looks like the stormwater source control and principles is the one that most folks feel like should be a requirement complied. Does anybody want to speak to that, or is there a, you know, something that would help make that clear as moving forward to what you'd like to understand or clarify?
Well, I guess I don't mind saying that. I know that's
Sure.
one of the places that it's the most costly to reverse, that if you can have source control, that's a place where the private action can be the most efficient.
And maybe addressing that sooner than later can head off some downstream problems, if I'm hearing you right,
And costs.
and costs. Sure. Any other thoughts on that stormwater source control principles language?
I was, you know, and maybe I'm just, you know, trying to think for people, but I assume people might be thinking about that, you know, where can we combine these principles? You know, where can we integrate maybe disconnected downspout with what you put in the landscape, and hopefully it uses less water type approach. Nobody's saying no to that, so.
Yeah, it does seem like these are complementary and some are a little bit more distinct than others. And the hydrozoning, I'm guessing that's a little bit of a in the eye of the beholder, potentially to some extent, or are there very clear delineations? Someone is sort of formally practicing hydrozoning or not? Because I read that and I think about my yard, and you know, maybe I'm trying to do that, but I don't know if I'm really doing that.
So Mark, that's a good question. It could be as simple as, you know, having a separate turf zone from your shrub zone. It could be as intricate as, you know, certain plants that would, let's say, go in this planted swale that is receiving downspout water are more appropriate and acclimated to receiving, you know, those large flushes of water and drying out, right? So it could go into, you know, choosing specific plant material for that particular area. Yeah, it's a common irrigation BMP. It's just, you know, being able to call it out and require it, right? You know, some of the quick and easy development we see here in Bend, for example, you know, are, you know, these things are just value engineered, right? To bare bones. It's the last thing to go in, and it's kind of like what change you have left in your pocket to put in. And we'll get, you know, 4 rotor zones, you know, large stream rotors spraying through shrubs over the lawn. And it's just, it costs, like you said, you know, the cost after the fact to go back and change that and make it efficient is put on the customer. And, you know, it's, so it's not equitable for them, but also it's just, it's not a good design, right? So that's kind of if we can get even a simplified version of that hydrozoning, you know, that's what we're looking for, just better management on site.
I have a question, just kind of thinking out loud here. Just in terms of like resources and, like reviewing, if say you were to have them submit a landscape and irrigation plan, like whether there's capacity to actually be able to review, or if there's capacity to enforce or inspect after it's constructed, because I know like I've over my career done a ton of irrigation plans, and almost always at construction, they tell me, well, I don't even know why landscape architects do irrigation plans because the contractor's just going to go in and put it in how they want anyways. And so I'm just kind of thinking like, it's important on both sides to be like thinking about the guy, like what needs to be installed, but then also holding them accountable for what is installed. Because to your point with, value engineering and stuff, a lot of times the landscape does go. So even if it looks like a great design coming in, is it what gets built? And is there any ability to, what is your capacity to enforce that? Because maybe if developers knew that, you were looking and inspecting afterward and they're going to be held accountable for it, that might change the practice of what they're putting in.
Yeah, you're right on point. That's something those are the next conversations we're going to have, after we get the feedback from you all. Is this goes back to our building and planning folks and saying, that's our carrot for them is, initially we're going to assist by with our manpower to review those and to do inspections. We'll work out the details of what that looks like and the enforcement authority that we have and that sort of thing. But yeah, you're totally right. There's field decisions that happen every day that could, throw something off. So we're cognizant of it. I don't know how it's going to exactly work out right now with the details, but we're hoping that, that could potentially be us and in the future, someone else with that regular position to look at that.
So I'm going to just open up that next panel to the right in the mural. So this is the planting standards language. You should see it show up if you're linked over on your browser to the mural space. So a couple of those snippets of language, approved street trees, tree location and spacing, and there's some specifics related to that. Approved plants, no turf permitted in the right of way, no synthetic turf permitted. And then there's some language around soil related to testing done to inform what kind of amendments or fertilizer rates might be needed, and then tilled to prevent layering. And then some language around mulches, organic mulches, weed barriers prohibited, and some language around the fertilizers as well. So kind of a similar process there. And if you need some new dots or icons, you can even just double click on the whiteboard, or you can go over to that panel on the left and grab your icon of choice from the llama.
Dan, can I ask a question? So I did read through some of the code language, and the landscape plans for the right of way is saying that they need to be stamped by a landscape architect. But then some of these spaces that we're talking about sound like, the boulevard strip out, between the sidewalk and the street, where, a lot of those projects are being designed not by landscape architects necessarily. So are you saying that like for a new lot out in Discovery West and Northwest Crossing, if I'm doing the landscape and irrigation plan, but I'm going to do that boulevard strip as well as part of that plan, am I going to have to go and get a landscape architect to sign off on my work now?
No, so the plan submittal requirements are only things that would be required under chapter 4, which would be like the master plans. So like a master plan development, something that's going to go under site plan review. And that's why we're going to talk about these 2 pathways. So for like the homeowner that might be doing it themselves, or a one-off, landscapers working with one home, we're looking for that checklist of guidelines to say, you applied for your building permit, you signed here that you're going to adhere to these kind of criteria, right? And then it's a lot easier to implement than, we're not going to request like a whole intricate irrigation design from them, right? But we're going to try to summarize that in those checkpoints, right? So that theoretically we get the same product.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. That's the hope. That's the hope.
And perhaps on the word hydrozoning, to like maybe kind of spell that out a little bit more, like what is really the most important thing about that? And I would have to say that trees would be on their own irrigation zone. So, you know, hydrozoning in the way of shrubs and perennials, just like run another ring of emitter line around it. You can put more water to a plant on the same zone, you know, in that regard. So it kind of gets a little confusing with irrigation zones versus hydrozoning, to maybe to spell it out, to say, you know, so if we're gonna, you know, get our water shut off at some point, if we could at least have the ability to irrigate those trees separately. I mean, that's, you know, that insurance policy for, there's such a, you know, value they bring to the landscape, property, you know, values and such, that, you know, trees are something to be of an insured a little bit. And so trees on their own zone, I would want to maybe talk more about that instead of just that word hydrozoning that could be interpreted loosely.
Okay. Yeah, I think in the language they do reference it, but maybe we need to make it a little bit more clear. Are you thinking for like that checklist version too, like for the homeowner being able to?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Because
we
you know, you could plant that, you know, your shrubs and perennials too, to get, you know, be low water native established, right? But still to have those trees separate. I really do think of it as an insurance policy in that regard.
Sure. We thought of, you know, maybe an easy way to kind of convey that too is almost creating like that little mock drawing of your property, you know, to show examples of how this is implemented. So we could do it like.
Sure. I mean, I've got,
yeah.
yeah, I've got plenty of irrigation plans I could show you as examples of that.
Cool.
Show that if you needed any references, or
Okay. Yeah.
soon to be installed landscapes as well. So
I'd
Here,
have to
Dan.
lean on you for that. Yeah.
Go ahead.
I saw Matt Schinderman had a comment about the native planting, drought tolerant planting standard comes in. Seems like it should be in the planting standards. I think the encouragement is still quite passive, especially given the times. Wonder if more aggressive or affirmative approach to native planting for commercial private developments. Agree with you, Matt, and we're hoping to get that or drive that in, I guess, in the more aggressive way with when we talk about the water budget approach. Talking with Rick Martinson, I think is Rick in here today? Maybe he could talk a little bit about what we're trying to do with some plant lists for folks to kind of, you know, inspire folks that, you know, here's some native combinations, you know, that maybe are that appealing traditional landscape look, but you know, have that.
I can talk about that a little bit.
Cool.
Yeah.
Thanks, Rick.
First, I want to apologize for coming in a little late at a meeting with Ned Dempsey that went way too long. So as usual with Ned. Anyway, interesting. So I missed about half of the meeting, then we have another one. I have to leave at noon. So, but to get to Matt's question and Dan's discussion, yeah, Matt, Dan, and a couple other people and I are working on some native plant standards for development areas. We're coming up with some recommended communities for a range of water use. So really Zurich to Mesick to kind of a high water use landscape palettes, and also designs that aren't necessarily just standardized designs, but more examples of how you can use different plant communities to meet those water objectives. So we're in kind of the middle of that process right now. As usual, I'm a little bit behind getting stuff to Dan on the plant community stuff, but that's definitely something that we're working in to get into the standards and guidelines and into the requirements with examples and plant palettes that are recommended to meet those objectives. Hopefully that meets it.
Awesome. Thank you, Rick. But
Sure.
to Matt's point, I'm taking from that is we need to maybe change some of that language to be a little bit more persistent. So that would be, let's see. I know we have some language in there, but great comment, Matt. And that is something, so I guess.
Dan, that might go under, you have the one that's called approved plants. And then it's a little confusing because the bullets under it are from the language that we have right now for the right of way. So this is like this is kind of the opposite of that, the way it's written now with those bullets. It's like first of all, should we have things that you can't do? So like we're trying to prevent turf in the right of way altogether. And then, maybe there's a corollary for people's properties. Like we don't say you can't ever have grass, but maybe you can only have this much grass. And so that's one side of it. But then the other might be, and I don't know, maybe this isn't the simplified approach, it's the design approach, but would be the idea of having plant palettes that help you meet using only a certain amount of water.
Yeah, I think
how not to dictate everything.
Sure.
To folks.
And I think that's why this section is so vague. And I think what Matt was referencing in the private development code in chapter 3, we do have some language. Again, it's very minimal, but it's that encourage to use native or drought tolerant plants, right? And so when we get into that chapter 3 discussion, that's where we really need some of this supplemental language. What can we grab from here and add to chapter 3, and what other things like what Matt's suggesting can we do to supplement that private side language? But yeah, I get what you're saying, Lori. We're trying not to create a cookie cutter landscape, but we are just trying to gently nudge in the right direction, right?
And I think that's going to be associated with the tree ordinance that the city council is going to take up later this month too. So
Yep.
That's all going to tie together. It's going to be an awkward discussion.
And in case you didn't see it, so the third column is also available if you want to add any checks there. So that is the irrigation excerpts language, and starts out with irrigation system designed to conserve and protect water resources. There's some bullets there. Second one is ensure the system does not violate 14.2.0. There's some specifics underneath that. And then there's language about drip and how those systems might be designed. And then a final item on the controllers, the irrigation controllers. And I think that might actually, I think it says ET data. I think that might be a little typo there, but feel free to add a check mark or an icon if you like. And then we'll come back here as a group, and Dan's been referencing those two approaches. So we want to definitely get a preview of what those two ideas are.
Aubrey, that's evapotranspiration. So that's not a typo. It is ET for short.
Very good. Very good.
Yeah.
And just a question for those of you who are the scientists or more scientifically versed on the planning standards. Which of those have the most, let's say, science in terms of biology, hydrology, chemistry, evidence behind them of their importance? I think we're probably thinking about which ones are most onerous and sort of a little bit of the aesthetics and practical, but also from a science perspective, which ones are most effective at water quality and or water quantity impacts? Or do all of them have some of that behind it?
I don't know, Mark, but that's an awesome question. I love that, thinking about that. Maybe Rick knows.
Let me get back here. Turn off my mute. Oh, it is off.
Yeah, you're good. You're good.
Maybe in particular, thinking about sort of the mulches, the fertilizers, the soil.
Yeah, I think from my standpoint, that would probably be the mulches and the fertilizers to answer your question. The rest of it is more kind of architectural standards and more aesthetics, like you had mentioned.
Okay, thanks.
Trying to get back in there. But those two, the mulches and the fertilizers, have the greatest potential to affect soil condition and moisture levels, things like that.
Oh, so that's under section, that was the purple question. If people were interested in that, there's an item called mulches there.
Yeah,
Yeah,
underneath. Yeah, under the purple section. Yeah.
Like the weed barriers, for example, is the reason to prohibit that water infiltration, ecological effects, or because I could see how weed control. I know we're supposed to control weeds on our property too.
Yeah, well, a lot of times we find that, you know, the weed seeds, you get fines that just collect on top of it, and the weed seeds germinate on top of the weed barrier anyway, so it's not that effective by itself. We'd encourage more mulch, you know, because you get that suppression through the mulch just as well as you would through the weed barrier. But yeah, also you get different variations of or interpretations of weed barrier. So you might get someone that tries to throw down 3 mil plastic, and then you've affected the breathing capacity of soil and infiltration of water. And so it's kind of like, I don't know, it's like the Scott's weed and feed from Home Depot. It's like kind of sold as like, hey, this is going to solve all your problems, but it doesn't, it's really not that effective. And a lot of times it ends up getting torn up through maintenance and becomes an eyesore. So multiple reasons for that, but most of it could be handled with mulches.
That's exactly what I was going to say, Dan, about the weed barriers. It kind of depends on what you use. A lot of people, you know, it used to be really popular to put the black plastic down and a bunch of bark dust on top of that, call it good. And that just kills the soil. So that's kind of nasty.
Yeah.
It'd be great to be able to communicate somewhere in conjunction with the code, the reasoning behind these, you know, so it's not just, doesn't look like it's some arbitrary decision, that there is a benefit, a social benefit. And in large cases, this was something I added on the education slide before, or mural page before, that pointing out where this is something that's in the owner's or the property's own best interest. Like, this is, the science shows that this code is actually to help you out. Like, you're making the point here that mulch is better control on weeds than a plastic weed barrier, letting people know that it's not just a decision on what people should do because it looks or feels consistent with some broader aesthetic, but rather it is more beneficial.
So in your mind, that's a great point. In your mind, Mark, is that like an accompanying fact sheet? Is that just, you know, like kind of what form? Because there is like, you know, documentation or education materials where we like mention that, but, you know, obviously we would need to, you know, condense all those ideas into one document that relates to this, right?
Yeah, I mean, thinking if the idea here is that you're going to enforce this in some way, and there's going to be outreach to property owners when you're giving them the code requirement, in some way also explaining why the code is what it is.
Sure. Okay.
So Dan, kind of looking at the votes people have cast, is there a question you want to ask the group before we transition over? Or from the group, is there something that you guys would like to mention about any of these standards that we haven't had a chance to talk through yet?
No, not with the votes themselves. I'm not surprised to see that irrigation isn't a crowd favorite. It's dear to my heart, but not everybody's. Let's see. No, I think I like the notes in here. I think, yeah, that communication, like Mark mentioned, is just going to be super important with all this. I think it's you know, that could come in the form of like open houses as we, you know, reveal this code. It could become, you know, like pre-con meeting references or fact sheets. But yeah.
Yeah, maybe it even gets combined with that little, you know, cartoon example graphic that you were talking about too. And it kind of is a, did you know, here's why these are
Yeah.
being suggested or required.
Maybe there's a little mulch icon.
With little squiggly lines.
Hey, Dan, I got
Yeah.
a question for you.
Sure.
The less than 6 feet dimension, that seems pretty narrow, I guess. You know,
the
actually
drip
getting into
requirement?
like 8 to 10 feet, you know, to not see overhead and like 10-foot spaces even. I'd like to see that. Or actually, is there even any possibility, because, right, we're talking about, we've got heads inset 3 to 5 inches from the curb line, and that's the street right there.
Mhm.
Is there any way that we could just say no overhead irrigation along any street at all? I mean, if it's 20 feet, I mean, still you get wind drift, you get, you know, that freeze issue on Empire where it's shady and there's car accidents. And I mean, what if we didn't have any irrigation lines along streets?
Mm-hmm.
You know, they get ran over. That poor, you know, Empire and 3rd Street there, where is it like Dairy Queen or whatever's on that corner?
Oh, yeah.
You know, I
Where
mean,
the
that
trucks running over,
the
yeah.
semis drive over that corner every time. That poor maintenance company, you know, has to go and fix those, where we shouldn't have an irrigation head even close to where someone could drive over it, let alone where
Yeah.
it could cause, you know, overspray and issues and waste that way. So I'd like to see them not even allowed.
Yeah, that's a possibility. I'm glad you brought that up. So that's our current language. The last time we revised this in 2017, our thoughts have been, number one, we call out, you know, obviously the no turf. So that's going to discourage overhead irrigation, right? But not necessarily. And again, it comes back to the plant material not being the deciding factor, right? We can still have overspray or overuse with xeric plants or low water use plants in overhead irrigation. I would love to see that expanded to like 10 feet. We've got plenty of examples of even 8-foot strips with the same problem.
Yeah.
So
Dan, can I clarify for, you know,
sure.
my not as technical self? So we're talking just no, you know, overhead irrigation, or but
Right.
you're talking about potentially like drip, because my concern becomes trees not living, and if we're using those landscape strips also for like swales, and we want to have some vegetation survive in them.
So right now with right away, we are hydrozoning trees separately. So in our capital projects, we do have deep watering bubblers, or they call it point source. So there's broadcast where we're, you know, either a pop-up or a rotor type. And there's various different models of those, or there's like a point source, which would be your drips and your bubbler, something that's at the crown of the plant or at the root ball. So trees right now, we are speccing deep root bubblers on either sides of the trees. And then right now, all the vegetation is being handled by drip. So that's just something that we've kind of expected and expressed with our city-owned projects. As far as it applies to the, you know, the private side, I think, you know, we could convey that pretty easily. But no, I agree. It's just, even in a 10-foot area, it's easier, but it's still going to happen. And there's a lot of other variables such as pressure and the application rate and the distribution type of the nozzle you're using that come into play that are going to affect how much water makes it into the street. So if we can just steer people away from that, and then have, like for that checklist, Molly, you know, it is a requirement. You're going to have, you know, a PRS head, you're going to have a low application rate nozzle. So those are things that'll help, but definitely, yeah, that spacing and modeling off of a lot of other cities, they've gone to that 10-foot model. just because that's where you're actually able to, as a maintenance person or an installer, actually kind of do what you're trying to achieve.
Right, right.
little
So
bit better, yeah.
is there room then to at least change that 6 foot to 10 foot then in our code?
I think so. I mean, as
Okay.
that's kind of what we
Where we're
want to
going.
revisit here. So yeah,
Okay. Thanks.
yeah. We just need your comments so we can say, see, it's not just us asking for it.
Great. So folks, if you want to add any more or change something, or if you weren't able to attend part of the meeting and want to slip back in, that space is going to stay open, but I'm going to bring slides back up here so we can hear a little bit from Dan about these two approaches. It should be showing now.
Thanks, Aubrey. So real quick, because I know we have to talk stormwater. Preceding our next meeting where we're going to talk about the private development side, the way we're thinking this, as far as requirements and a plan review and inspections, would be two kind of pathways for folks to take. Again, we kind of mentioned like the master plan development or the larger site plan development being the customized, or maybe the one-off building being the simplified approach. So things that are handled under just a building permit. That's kind of our streamlined checklist. That one is just going to call out limitations of turf to no more than 20% of the total landscaped area. There's lots of details within that. So there's setbacks off of any impervious surface. So driveways, sidewalks, where they can't have that broadcast irrigation tucked up right up to the concrete or the sidewalk. It has to be set in 18 to 24 inches. So it still allows for maybe a planted buffer with drip around the edges, but really trying to push that overhead and those high water need plants towards the center of the landscape and away from the street and any other conduit that would move runoff off the property. We would incorporate our right-of-way standards, kind of just what we ran through, and then providing the informational sheets so that people kind of understand what we're asking of them, and it's not that interpretation in the field that Bronwyn was talking about. The customized approach, it's going to be general guidelines. So we're going to have, specific things that we call out, the application rates of sprinklers, that sort of thing. The site plan must meet a water budget. And so there's a lot that goes into that. We'll talk about that in the next meeting. We could probably spend a couple meetings on that. But essentially what this allows the landscape or the designer to do, or the architect to do, is still meet our water requirement for the sites, but have a little bit more capacity for a design. So this is going to be, kind of our larger upscale developments where they want an appealing design. They can still do this and meet our water requirements, right? So we're a little bit less in the box and still getting what we need. But with that, and in our current language in private development, the landscape and irrigation plan would both be required for that. That's currently in our language in private development. It's just not being upheld. So that's one of those processes we're going to work on. And then again, more resources and education for contractors, designers, developers. So that's kind of the quick and dirty on where we're going next week.
So kind of two questions to think of mind. And if folks have input on this right now, we could certainly spend maybe 5 minutes or so chatting about it. But we are going to circle back, not next meeting, which will be focused on stormwater, but the following meeting. So two questions here, kind of what's your general thoughts, thinking about having a two-pronged approach, a simplified and a customized, a route that could be taken, two options. And then thinking about communicating about those different approaches, what would help, what tools or communications would help to make those understandable to folks. And I'll maybe just sneak back here to the screen that had the two approaches and then open the floor if anybody wants to chime in now.
I think what's important is the simplified approach, which I think probably most people will take, is one where you don't necessarily have to hire a design professional. So it lays out some basics. And if you follow those, we think we'll get the needed water conservation benefits. Won't be perfect, but it should be easy to follow. And then the customized approach, I would see being used by those who have a design team on board. So those designing, you know, kind of the big subdivision that's going to have a lot of HOA areas, or a bigger commercial project, or things like that.
I have a question. So how is the 20% of the landscape area defined for projects? What constitutes landscape area?
It's what would be required by code, I think,
Is it-
Elizabeth.
Is that all non-pervious surface?
So
pretty
that's
much?
anything that's not house or impervious surface footprint. So
Yeah, maybe
anything
we need to
that's
define it.
potentially landscaped, yeah.
And I think, Dan, we were talking, that doesn't include the right of way. This is the behind the sidewalk stuff.
Right, correct.
I'll say in general, I really like the two-pronged approach, and I think it makes a lot of sense to have a very clear, simplified approach. But if people want to get creative, they've got another approach they can take. I can see how you might need to have a little more description behind the customized, so you can understand what's really implied. So it's not just always an excuse to basically do anything you want. But keeping the simplified, maybe a little bit more strict, does make sense. I would assume that if I was in that position, and this is probably a very basic question. This is only for new development. Is there any, I guess if you're doing redevelopment, if you're doing new landscaping, what exactly would trigger these kinds of rules?
Oh, that's
Is
a
it
good
only a new building
question.
code?
That's a really good question, because we have to start thinking about that on the stormwater side for redevelopment. So that's an interesting question to think about, redevelopment on the landscape water conservation side. Thanks for
Mhm.
bringing that up. Yeah, maybe we can even talk in terms of incentives there, right? So if you're redeveloping, is there an incentive we can provide to upgrade, in our terms, your landscape?
Lori, can I ask a quick question?
Mhm.
So could they, there is a lot of overlap here. I think Mark touched on that. Could a developer, meet, I guess, both requirements if they're trying to, if they're creating a bunch of impervious surface and need to meet the post-construction requirements of the MS4 permit? Could they?
Definitely, and we've been
Could they-
talking, Ryan, about like if we create these kind of simplified templates, like say for a single house, and there's a template for, what does it mean 20% lawn? What does it mean your irrigation system has to be a certain distance away from the impervious area? We were thinking about, should we add on that same template or have a related template that shows the opportunity to, disconnect the downspout, right? And have it go into have that flow into these areas.
Yeah.
Yeah, I totally agree, Ryan. I think there's definitely opportunity.
This is good because I haven't thought about it from the water conservation side a lot. So it's, but I also like Mark's comments about the mulch, and if you're using the right types of soils and mulches and plants and trees, then you're going to get more stormwater treatment in those facilities as well, even if it's just a strip, along the road.
Right. And I've seen
good
up
point.
in the Puget Sound area, up in Washington, I think there's credits of some sort, or it's things you can check off on a checklist related to stormwater, but you get some kind of credit if you apply mulch to soil because well, it collects stormwater, right?
Yeah.
Less will leave the site.
So that's actually a good segue. So maybe Elizabeth, we might actually just kind of sneak into your section here and take a few minutes, last few minutes of the meeting and do a update. You want to take the floor?
Yeah. Okay, so I think in the December meeting, Lori kind of gave an overview of the stormwater program. And this is kind of going back to that, a reminder that we have 2 different permits for stormwater. The first one is the UIC permit, which stands for underground injection control. So this is anything that covers water flowing into dry wells, drill holes, and infiltrating groundwater. So not related to surface water. So for this permit, it's expiring in 2023, and we have a reapplication due by April 30th. And we're also working on a system-wide assessment update for all the UICs in the city and a depth to groundwater analysis. So that's going to be part of our reapplication process. And then a while back, we were going to be required to submit an interim integrated stormwater management plan along with our reapplication to DEQ. However, we came to an agreement with them that we're gonna not send an interim one. We're just going to send the final one in November with our stormwater permit due date. Because they're really, it's really a combined document. So it didn't make a lot of sense to do an interim one for the UICs and then have a full one that soon in November of the same year. And then on the stormwater side, so our MS4 stormwater permit from DEQ, that deals with any water that flows to surface waters in the city of Bend. And so this permit was issued in January of last year, so it's about a year old now. It does, although it's effective now, it does have varying implementation deadlines between 2023 and 2025. So although it's effective, certain things won't be required until certain points during those timeframes, which we'll talk about in the next slide. And right now for this permit, we're working on a lot of internal review of our procedures and practices and conducting internal workshops across different departments of the city in the spring. And that's all contributing towards a revised integrated stormwater management plan, which talks about how we're going to implement all of these requirements in our permit. I think we can go to the next slide. So this is kind of a timeline of our upcoming outreach and regulatory milestones for stormwater program. So anything that's highlighted UPAG is going to be where we're looking for your input. So we have coming up in April, we have the permit reapplication, which I mentioned, and then we have the crossed out stormwater management program document because that's now being submitted in November. And then next month, we're also going to be focusing more on drainage and density discussions for stormwater. So we'll be looking for your input on that. And then in June, we have the UPAG field tour or field trip coming up that hopefully everyone can attend, and tentatively an inspection by DEQ for our stormwater program. And then in September, we have some of those implementation deadlines in the stormwater permit starting to show up. One of those is a outfall dry weather screening, where we'll go out and assess all of the outfalls that flow to the river. And then we also have to identify some barriers to LID, and which is low impact development and green infrastructure. And that's kind of why in April, we're going to be talking a little bit about drainage and density, because we're going to want your input on some of these questions. And then for September, we're also going to look for input on the document itself that's due in November. And then in November, we do have our actual document is due to DEQ by November 1st with our annual report. And this is going to include updates for public education, illicit discharge, the mapping requirements. So we'll be on the lookout for that for your input in September. And then kind of moving forward, everything after September of 2023 is going to deal with some of those other implementation deadlines further out in the permit, which is construction site development and updates to codes and standards. And then we're also going to start looking for input on the stormwater master plan.
Ms. Folks may remember we did a bit of a description at a previous meeting about the difference between the stormwater management plan, which is a regulatory document, and the stormwater master plan. So the stormwater management plan, again, is the regulatory document required by DEQ, where we tell them, here's how we're going to comply with all of these permit requirements. Here's the steps we're going to take to put into place measures that will comply with the permit. A stormwater master plan is kind of a larger citywide document where we evaluate the condition of our systems and what type of capital projects we need to better manage stormwater, what type of larger programmatic needs we have. That results in a plan where then we do a rate study and we look at what would it take to pay for all this stuff, and go from there. So they're related documents, but they're not the same thing. And Molly's got her hand up. Oh.
No.
Oh, that was my little hand on the screen on your face. Sorry, Molly.
It's like, no, I'm pretty sure did I hit something? No.
No, it was me. Sorry.
Yeah, so this just kind of gives you guys a long-term overview of where we're looking for UPAG input for the stormwater programs. And some of these, the further out deadlines may change, exactly when we're going to talk about a couple of these topics, but kind of gives you a good idea for when things are coming up.
And then our next slide is kind of a preview of some of the focus questions that will frame our April discussion, conversation.
Yeah, so we have a couple brainstormed questions, not totally set on all of them yet, but just some things to think about before April. What factors should be considered when determining ongoing maintenance responsibility for structural stormwater facilities? And by that, we're kind of thinking about different kinds of facilities. So are they privately owned, commercially owned? Is it receiving commingled runoff from public and private areas? And then another question, under what scenarios should offsite drainage be an option for development projects? So starting to think about kind of the drainage and density concept and what off ramps we can start to create for when it's not technically feasible or other reasons that we need to start dealing with drainage offsite. And then just going back to the general question of kind of training and the development community. I know we talked about it a little bit in some other UPAG meetings, but kind of touching back on that and seeing where the development community needs more training. And on what topic.
Great. So just on a calendar, that's what that looks like. And as mentioned, then in May, we're going to come back and have kind of the second part of this water conservation discussion and build on today's dialogue. And then June, we're still looking forward to an in-person opportunity to connect with this group.
Yeah, we're hoping in June, we've started talking about what that might look like. We'll keep it to still the same amount of time. We'll probably have a van where we could drive folks around. We'll pick a couple of sites to go look at, probably some existing development sites where we can stand around and kick the tires and talk about, what do we see, good, bad, and the ugly, and how do we keep doing the good and do better on other areas as related to all the things we've been talking about, stormwater management and water conservation, landscape, all those types of things. So I think it'll be fun, and we'll provide food.
Snacks always make the difference. So any other last thoughts from the group, or Wes, Emily, Lawrence, anything that you guys wanted to add in before we close things out today? Excellent. Thank you for the thumbs up. Much appreciated. Good.
I'll also
Well,
give a 2 thumbs up. Sorry, I've been off video today, but this is really exciting content to be hearing about.
awesome.
Thanks, Emily.
Yeah, everybody's input is greatly appreciated.
And
Good.
if you think of things, everybody now, you have that link to the mural board. So happy to have you continue to provide more comments on that, you know, either on sticky notes or more checks or whatever you want to do. We'd love to have that content there.
Yeah, when I'm put under pressure to put something thoughtful down right away, it doesn't work like that. So I'll have some better feedback for you when I get a chance to digest all that. So
Yeah, there's a lot to reflect on, so no worries. And you know, sometimes a long walk or a good meal can spark more thought. So take advantage of that space. And there's a couple other questions there too. You know, thinking about communicating about those, the standards language itself, but also, you know, kind of communicating about those two approaches. If there's more thoughts that you have there, anything that you add into those two question boxes, we can use to help maybe frame up that May conversation too, so we get the best use of your guys' time. All right, so with that, I think we can call it a day, at least for this, and let everybody get some lunch and enjoy the day. Thank you.
Thank
so
you,
much.
everyone. Really
Thanks,
appreciate your
Aubrey.
time.
Thanks, everybody.
Everyone.